Alright guys, I've got a how did I lose this game submission from Thin White Duke, who's seen before on this channel. Both players are rated just under 900 and Thin White Duke has the white pieces and we have the Vienna. Now this is the Zhuravlev counter gambit apparently. I think the correct move here is actually bishop c4. But Duke plays knight f3, attacking the undefended pawn. It's a perfectly reasonable move. Black defends, and now the bishop comes out to c4. Alright. c6 now. Why did my opponent play that move? I can only assume he's thinking, got plans of pushing d5. Can't really see any opportunity for the queen to come out here in a hurry. So white castles, we have a trade of minor pieces. Recapturing of the b pawn is very typical here because it also lines up d4. So then if, you know, d4, e takes, c takes, and we've got a nice pawn majority in the center. Thank you very much. Okay, and now d6, kind of slow. He's got no pieces developed out in the board and decides to push a pawn. Yes, it might allow the bishop to come out, but I don't know, I just feel like, well, I suppose it's also because he's pushed this already, it's taken away the natural development square for this knight, so that kind of makes sense, I suppose. And now d4, bishop comes out pinning the knight on the queen. So one option here, as always with this, is to lift your queen to like the third rank where it's still defending the knight, so if bishop takes you can recapture, but it breaks the pin and allows the knight to go on about his day. We have bishop to b2. This is a funny move. I don't really get this move because the bishop's got no future on this diagonal at all, so the only squares that it's got from here are those two. I don't think I approve of that move very much. I mean, even bishop to e3 would have made more sense, or a3, where at least it's got a bit of a line of sight down towards where the king or rook might end up. But bishop to b2, can't sanction that one. Okay, we have bishop now swaps itself off for the knight, which again is a bit odd. Because again, what we've got is black has developed a piece and then swapped it off, and developed another piece and then swapped it off, right? So now white has 3 developed pieces and is castled. So it's a development kind of score of 5-0 right now. So white should be completely overwhelmingly on top. Now we have the trade of pawns in the middle, which only improves white's situation, right? White now has d and e pawns, black has only the d pawn, and 0 development. So what should white do in this kind of situation? Well, what you have to do is you have to say, well, what are the imbalances that are in my favor? I've got pieces out on the board and my king is safe, right? What are the imbalances against my opponent? His king's still stuck in the middle of the board and he's not about to castle anytime soon. So what would you do? I think centralize the rooks and charge for up the middle of the board, right? Try and open up the middle of the board. So anyway, it's black's turn. We have pawn to b5. Bishop now retreats to here. I don't know if b3 might not have been better again here. An alternative as well is even bishop takes knight, forcing rook takes knight, and then there's no castling for black in this direction, and it leaves the way open for these pawns just to come flooding through, right? So I think, you know, bishop takes, rook takes, e5, takes, pawn takes, doesn't matter. Centralize the rooks and really just drive a stake through the heart of this game. This is a bit kind of scaredy, a bit passive. Now the queen comes in. And right, this move again, I don't really understand. It's a kind of a non-move move, right? It's defending this pawn that was already defended by this bishop. Okay. You need to be playing the critical move. So here, I think e5. You know, you want to punch through the middle of the board. e5, forcing something to happen in the middle, right? e5, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. Again, rook e1. You've got a bishop. You've got a rook lined up against this. The king and queen are in line. You want to open up this e-file at all costs right now. So this is just too slow. That's not much of a move. Rook f2 e1, good. Like to see this now. But it's slightly too slow, right? Because black has now been able to castle. Now we have d5. Now d5 allows the pawn to push and create a gridlock, okay? I think I would have preferred e5 because that forces one of these pawns to do something, because you're threatening to capture one or the other with a discovered attack by the rook on the queen. Okay, so this again I think just inaccurate. Okay, but we win a pawn. Okay, and now we're a pawn up. A lot of the advantages evaporated since black has been allowed to castle. a5, kind of slow. Centralizing a rook, kind of okay. Here you might want to think about playing a3 just to block that off, if that is indeed what white does. But you need to be getting ready with this pawn break, right? You've got the bishop pair. These bishops are actually brilliantly placed, slicing across the board towards your opponent's king side now, but they are both hampered by pawns. So what you want to do is you want to drop a grenade and rid the board of pawns. So it doesn't matter, just chuck your pawns in at this point in time. Queen now comes across attacking the bishop. Bishop moves. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, the alternative would be to put the rook back there. But bishop moves. Rook up. Slightly odd move, but I'm sure there's a point to it. Now, this is a nice idea. Queen g3, so we're threatening. Bishop takes the knight, and this pawn is now pinned and can't recapture. Okay, so black actually misses the threat, and we get the knight. So now we're a piece up. Okay, so even here, I would definitely consider bishop takes g5, pawn takes, queen takes, check. Right, we're exposing the king. We're doing what has to be done to get to this king. Another old idea could be to drop your bishop back here, push this pawn through, line your bishop up with this, right? Everything right now is in white's favour. Yeah, and we win a rook. Wow. Okay, this should be overwhelming now. Now what you need to do in this kind of situation is get your evil on. You have to do whatever it takes to punish your opponent's mistakes. Queen f3 is not a bad move. It's lining up the queen at least with the king there. Means that this pawn is actually unprotected. King moves. Okay, and now again dynamism. Queen h5. Not really attacking anything, is it? This lone star queen, this solo queen cannot launch a convincing attack against black on her own. Right, she needs some backup. She needs rooks coming in, but I still think this is like the stopper in white's position. We've been wanting to push this pawn and just get rid of any of this material. You know, if this pawn takes, you've got queen takes there. Here, that pawn takes. That's better for black, but then bishop back down to here. You're threatening queen there. You've got to move this pawn. You've got to open up the middle of the board. I think this is a case of simply misreading the board. Okay, now queen comes across, proposing a trade of queens. Do it. Do it. We're a rook up. Yes. Trade of queens. Okay, now, h3. What's that about? What's that about? So what would I be doing in this situation? I'd be saying this bishop is terrible. That's what I'd be doing. He's saying, I've got to do something with this bishop. Let's bring it around here. Let's do something, or let's bring it like here. Get it to a nice outpost where it's attacking stuff. This bishop is just terrible, and it has been for a while. h3, don't really get. now rook lift, nice to see, okay? But it walks into a knight fork, right? Now, problem is the rook can't defend the bishop in any way, right? Apart from going here and getting taken by a pawn. Okay, but the bishop can defend the rook. So if, for example, you just put your bishop there, knight takes rook, bishop recaptures. So you've gone down the exchange, right? But we were up a full rook. So let's say bishop here, go there. So we would end up with a rook and a bishop against a rook. Okay, still should be winning. This way, we just drop the piece. Okay, but still, again, should be winning. Right? King into... Okay, so that's protecting against this idea, but what's wrong with King G2? King G2 actually defends that square. I'd have done King G2, because knight comes in anyway, knight comes back, F4 now. Good. You know, I mean, we've got the extra... Okay, this is another knight fork, so it's starting to get unpicked a little bit with tactics here. Got to save the rook. Pawn takes. Pawn takes. Might have been inclined to capture with a rook there. It means this pawn's pinned. You know, you can start throwing pawns up. You could start even double up the rooks and go after this. Okay, they grab the knight. Nice. Finally, e5 comes. Yeah, about 20 moves too late, but okay, it allows that. And now, yeah, I mean, pawn takes there would have been a good idea. It would leave this pawn friendless and alone. But e6, you can kind of see that. It really wants a rook behind it and wants to, or if not two rooks, but two rooks behind it. And then what's going to stop that? What is going to stop that? Well, let's see. Okay, right, that is not behind the pawn. That is in the wrong place. Okay, so our objective here is to promote this pawn. Okay, so this is what you need to do in the ending. How do I guarantee that I win this game from a winning position? Well, put your rooks behind your stupid pawn and march him on to promotion. Simple. H4, very little point. Knight attacks rook. Rook comes across to an open file, again not supporting this pawn. Now, black knows what to do. Black thinks, I know what, I'll promote a pawn and win the game. Okay, we have rook to here, and now rook to a1. Now, knight to b3, and here I've had a quick look at the analysis. This looks very, very bad for black. Sorry, for white. Okay, because the rook is preventing this pawn from promoting and it's under attack. However, there was a tactic. Okay, we've got 7 minutes 40 still on the clock. Black has played surprisingly quick. I think this is a 15 plus 10 game and black's on 18 minutes, right? The tactic here is rook f8 check. Okay, so the king can't go on these squares or here, right? So that if the rook were to go here, the king has to go there, or here. So let's think about that. If the king goes to here or here, you've got rook there, which gets rid of this rook, right? So let's say rook here, king goes there, boom, and the king has to move, and then you take the rook, and then on your next turn you're going to take that one, that pawn, okay, and you're in a winning position. You go here, and the king goes there. Again, go there with check, force the rook to capture, pawn recaptures, king captures, and then you grab the pawn. Rook here, and the king goes there. Might be less clear, but actually rook g1 might be pretty dangerous in that situation. But that's what we have to do, is like forcing moves. Like when you are under attack, try and retaliate with a greater threat to your opponent. Okay, so what we have here is the rook sacrifices himself to grab the pawn, and now from being in a totally winning position, white is just down. White is behind the full piece, and it doesn't last all that much longer. King goes to here, we grab a pawn. This is okay. I mean, it's not a desperate situation. White does at least have one extra pawn, so Again, in the end game, what you have to do, so here the move should be rook takes h7, yeah? So we've got 2 extra pawns for a knight. We're only down 1 material point, okay? So what has to happen? What has to happen if white's going to win this game? Well, one of these pawns is going to have to promote, I think, quite simply. Okay? Even if you can force the rooks to swap each other off, that might even work. Having said that, black also has a passed pawn, so one of these pawns has to get up the board pretty quick. King goes to there, pawn moves, good. Pawn moves again. Attacks, okay. Alright, and there again. Now this is a big blunder, right? Because this walks straight into rook h4 with a fork on king and pawn. What white needed to do here was to play king to g3. King to g3 attacks the rook and guards all of these squares. Okay, so the rook can't go to h4 to grab the pawn. Right, king there. You're either going to. So what can the rook do? Right, you go here. Rook takes rook, king takes rook, get a queen and win. Right, you go here, goes there to capture the rook. Okay, so still very, very strong position. Blundered. Rook grabs the thing. Now, what I would probably do here is think about this, attack the knight. The knight moves, you come back here with check, king has to move, you win the rook. But we have king f4. Rook now comes down out of safety, so it's safe from this skewer threat. So yeah, again, this king move unnecessary at this point, because this move on the previous move would have been great, but now we do it, but it's too late. The threat is gone. Okay, we attack the king. Now what do we do? I would say probably rook to here. Because the king can't go there, there. Can't go there, there. It's king would have to go here. Right? So rook here, the king has to move there. There's no option. And then pawn promotes? Maybe? Rook here, there. Not sure the pawn can promote straight away, but there would be options. But what we have is rook to here coming after this pawn. Now this pawn is not the deal breaker. Okay, it does maybe support pawn to e7, but this is the dangerous pawn. That's the one you want to eliminate from the board. Okay, rook takes that pawn, pawn pushes forward, king there, promote the queen, but it's not going to last much longer. You know, this pawn is now going to promote. So definitely a load of missed opportunities there. But I think the key thing in the middle of the game was just failing to understand. I mean, white got a huge advantage in that game, and then failed to do what was necessary from a strategic point of view, which was, you see that your opponent isn't castled, you've got your king castled, you want to centralise, get your big guns, your rooks and your queen in the middle of the board, and then punch through. That would probably have led to many, many winning opportunities, but somehow, you know, white seemed to maybe come off the gas a bit and start playing a bit passive. But you know, fair play to black, did what he had to do to secure the win in the end, and ended up promoting the pawn, and then resignation from white. So there you go. Definitely an interesting game. Hope it's a useful learning experience. That game really any day of the week should have been completely won for white. Okay, well guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.